welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus with Bob Mendelsohn.
We're going to study tonight Exodus chapter 33. In direct opposition to what God had said, the people made an idol. If they'd have just said, look, we don't want God, then God might have said, well, all right, we can work things out. But what they did was they created a substitute God and said, that's the one who brought us out of Egypt, which was a direct slap in his spiritual face. What is your response when that happens to you? What is God's response when that happens to him? He's promised us, the number one thing that God has promised us, and we're going to hear it over and over, is his presence. That's what he's promised us. So what is his number one punishment going to be but the withdrawal of his presence? And that is what we're going to see beginning tonight. Chapter 33. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you've brought up from the land of Egypt, to the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying to your descendants, I'll give it. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite." Just quickly, which one did he leave out? Girgashite, that's the one he left out. He says, "Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Davash, for I will not go up in your midst, because you are a hard people." We read obstinate. "And I might destroy you on the way." So God says to Moses, get up, get out of here. You and those people. You brought them up from the land of Egypt. They're your people. They're all wearing your stripes. They're all wearing Moses, he's our man t-shirts. "And to the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying to your descendants, or to your zaracha, to your seed, I will give it. I'll do this, I tell you what, I'll send an angel before you, I'll drive out the 7 nations, but I'm not going up in your midst." Absence replaces presence. This is punishment. And painful. And if you know anything about relationships with parents or with siblings or with children or with bosses or neighbors, if somebody withdraws their presence from you, it is the most punishing thing they can do. I know people with whom I speak on a regular basis whose children, they're adults, whose children won't talk to them. Adult children. I think that has to be the worst thing on the planet. If my parents, who did throw me out when I was a brand new believer, had maintained that separation over the decades that they were alive while I was still walking in faith, that would have been so harsh. And I just value relationships so much that I think this would be the most punishing reality, especially if, in answer to...
Were your parents talking to you when you became a believer?
Before that, yes. We were in good relationship. But as soon as I came to faith, no, they threw me out of the house. They wouldn't talk to me. This went on and off. On for a year, they wouldn't talk to me. And then over the course of the next 8 years, it was on and off. Until we had a son. And once we had a son, everything was golden again. And yet there are some. I know a fellow in the U.S. who came to faith, similar thing. Parents wouldn't talk to him. And had a son. Parents wouldn't talk to the son. The son had a son. The grandparents wouldn't talk to the son's son. There is such a repulsion. And they're basing it on their religion. And you got to appreciate that. Religion, if you're going to be a staunch religionist, I suppose there are times when you have to go up even against your own family. We've certainly lived that. I get it. But at the end of the day, humanity says, that's my mishpacha. You don't do that. When the people, verse 4, heard this sad word, but the Hebrew is not sad, it is adavar hara, evil word. Interesting that evil takes on different valence there in the translations. Sad word, They went into mourning, and none of them put on his ornaments. The people had said to Moses, "Hey, say to the sons of Israel, you're an obstinate people." The Lord had said to Moses, "Tell the people this, should I go up in your midst for one moment, I'd destroy you. Now therefore put off your ornaments from you, that I might know what I shall do with you." So the sons of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. So how do you read that? What does taking off their ornaments mean?
Is it all the things that they got from the Egyptians?
That's right, because they were slaves, so they wouldn't have had jewelry necessarily. So take off their ornaments. Now they obviously still had some. It was all not thrown into the fire and creating the golden calf. Okay, what else do we learn? What does ornament mean? We could read it as ornamental stuff, that is, things that are gaudy and blingy, right? Or we could read it as ordinary stuff. Don't put on your ordinary. So in other words, don't put on things that make it into anything special, whether it's jewelry or just your regular clothes. In other words, what you've got going right now is not only a sad word, but a sad response. What you've got is the people who are moving into a morbid kind of response. Oh, great. Now God's not even going to go with us.
Is it similar when a Jew mourns, his shter is shut?
Yeah. 7 through 11. Here we see a scene. It seems unusual in the midst of this take them, don't take them, presence, absence kind of thing, that we see this bonus section thrown in about Moses' backyard. And it was outside the camp, so it's not the usual formation. It's certainly not the tabernacle that's being referenced, is it? Because the tabernacle was going to be in the dead center of the camp. But this was a tent of meeting, the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting together. And it's like, who was it who advised Moses? Jethro, that's right, Jethro, who advised him, you got this whole court system crazy. You need to spread it out and get some more people. At the same time, Moses still was going to conduct certain Supreme Court activity. And this is what was, I don't know why, inserted here in chapter 33. Seems a funny place to put it. But maybe it's to say something. Remember, what did the people say last week concerning the building of the golden calf? Why did they say they wanted it? Moses was delayed. Therefore, Moses is not our man. We're not sure he's still the guy. So we're going to get a calf. That'll be our guy.
Or if he's still alive.
Right. We don't know anything about him. So I'll tell you what. He's out. Who's in? Aaron, you're in. They probably went to Joshua, who wanted to have nothing to do with it. And then they went to the calf and said, you're in.
Joshua was with Moses.
Yeah, he was halfway up. So this is probably inserted here in chapter 33 to remind us that Moses was the anointed. Moses spoke to God like one speaks to his friend. And that doesn't mean Moses was pedestrian with God, but rather that he had a relationship with God. And that's important to understand. So God is trying, and through the pen of Moses, to say, let's see if the people get it right and submit to the authority that Moses is. So that's why I think it's inserted here. When Moses went to the tent, all the people, verse 8, would arise and stand, everybody, and gaze after he'd entered the tent. It's just like a parade. You ever been in a place where people would come out of their tent and watch a parade go by? You ever been there at a place like that? In Ireland on St. Patrick's Day, everybody comes out to their little local town. Every little village, Edgecliff would have one, Woolara would have one, Waverley would have a parade. Everybody's got a parade. And it's at 12 or 1 or 2 or whatever, and everybody comes out. People march, kids twirl batons, and everybody applauds and wears green, and it's a lively thing. I was in Morocco with Patty one day, and we were in a little markets area, which really Tangier is completely markets, and there was some screaming going on outside.
The markets.
Outside the markets. And it's a little tiny narrow passageway between markets on this side of the street, hard to call it a street, and the other side of the street. It's a laneway, really. And we came out. Immediately, the shopkeep, everybody from both sides came out, and it turns out it was a funeral of a man, and they were carrying the box, open casket, They were carrying it right down the middle of this laneway, and everybody came out and added their singing to the mourning that was going on, live and in color. But I had not seen that. It was just like Moses would have experienced. He's walking by and everybody comes outside. You don't stay in your tent. The man of God is walking by. I was in a little building in Brooklyn, New York, around 1992, called 770 Eastern Parkway. That is where the Lubavitcher Rebbe lived. And I went into that building. I parked across the street in my Jews for Jesus vehicle. I wasn't wearing anything that indicated I was a Jew for Jesus. But I walked in, I said, I've seen this place how many hundreds of times. I'm going to stop in. The Rebbe came by. He was in one little lounge room and he was walking. He had this entourage. It looked like a crowded scene at the end of a marathon. Just think, City to Surf, where the guy comes through. If you're the first guy who comes through, you're going to be surrounded by all the people giving you T-shirts and Sydney Morning Heralds and interviewing guys. And that's what was surrounding the Rebbe. Menachem Schneerson, he was surrounded by all this crew of people, and it kind of washed me to the side. I've told some Hasidim after that I was in the room when the Rebbe came by, and he said, "Did you touch him?" No, and he didn't touch me either. I thought, what a weird thing to imagine. High five, to a 90-year-old. That wouldn't have worked. But this idea of this swale of activity, and all associated with a giant, as you say, of a man. He definitely had that charisma. Moses had that. And whenever he'd enter the tent, then not only would the people attest to who he was, look at verse 9. The pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. So even God attested to who he was. Pretty remarkable. What's missing? The pillar of cloud. What was the other one? The pillar of fire. At nighttime. So when did he do this? Daytime, see? So that's what sometimes the Bible helps us understand. What time it is, what day it is, things like that. I like the people's response. In verse 10, all the people saw the pillar of cloud, and they would arise and worship, each at the entrance of his tent. We've already seen them do that when Moses came by. That means they went back into their tent. Then the pillar of cloud shows up, and they again arise, come out, and give honor now to the God of the pillar of cloud. You got to like that. And that's when the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, verse 11. And when Moses returned to the camp, Joshua would not depart from the tent. So somehow this association, Moses and Joshua, hinted at before, is increasingly visible, and it certainly is going to be that he's the heir apparent. He's the successor.
Moses had his own personal quiet time place, because otherwise how can you hear God amongst...
And he had to get away. He could have had maybe a double tent, but he still would have been in the din of the noise of the camp. Have you ever been in a camp? You've gone camping. Even if you're on, I was on Kilimanjaro 2 years ago, and you're there, it is private as, you're on a trail, you and 12 other guys, but they go ahead and you with 2 other people, and you're just climbing the hill all day, and you finally get to your place of repair, whether it's lunchtime or for evening, and you often find a big flat area, like just think a cricket pitch or something like that, and there will be other groups that have come up other trails and that'll be there at that place. Well, you've got your little tent. So Patty and I were in our little tent, and we had our little conversations. But you could hear other noises going on in the other tents. That's the way it is. And it wasn't millions of people. So, as you say, there were 3 million people there on and near Moses. That din would have been pretty significant. And to get away, however far, it doesn't say how far he was outside the camp. But he had to get out. That is clear. And that's advisement to us, isn't it? That tells us what we need to do, get away from the madding crowd.
And Yeshua was doing the same.
Always. Early morning, withdrew to...
People,
I can't imagine being the administrator of 100,000, much less 3 million. Verse 12, Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you yourself have not let me know whom you will send with me. Moreover, You have said, I've known you by name, and you also have found favor in my sight. Now therefore, intercession going on here. I pray you, if I found favor in your sight, let me know your ways, that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. This is brilliant tactic by Moses to remind God of God's plan with the Jewish people. Hey, these aren't just my people. Don't give me this. I didn't create them. I just rocked up and they were already there. Now, these people are your people. And I like that. This is exactly the kind of prayer you need to be praying for those who are sad or hard, obstinate, whoever they are. God tells you, I'll tell you what, you're all right, but those people, we don't need them. You say, excuse me, they're your people. This is exactly what a prayer person does. He reminds God of God's life, God's plan, God's purposes, God's people. That's what we're supposed to do. What does verse 13 say to you? This is pretty deep. If I've found favor in your sight, let me know your ways, in order that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your sight. Seems circular. It's not even close. If I've found favor, then do some things. We use the word favor when we say, that's my favorite ice cream, or that's my favorite TV show, or you're my favorite friend, BFF. We say that word. Moses says it very clearly. It's the same word that Noah found. It's the same word, im na matzati chen. The word na is inserted in verse 13 twice, if I remember. Yeah. It's been translated, I pray thee, or please. Do you remember the song from the 80s by Michael Card, sung by Amy Grant, called El Shaddai, where he added this weird word, Ercham Chana Adonai. Ercham Cha. It's stuck in a na. It's the same stuck that we have twice in verse 13 here. It's sort of an It's sort of a while I'm thinking of it, but it's more than that. It's, I pray thee, maybe even better translated, please. Could you? Would you? Im matzati chen, if I found favor. We read in Genesis that Noah matzah chen, found grace or found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And it's a common phrase throughout the record of Scripture. So, im, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me know your ways. And there's the na again found there. Let me please know your ways. Im matzati chen, if I found favor. And it's hodieni na et derachecha. I love the na. It's really an unnecessary word, but it's a pleading. And if you pick up the idea of supplication from this, that's a different prayer than intercession. Supplication is what he's doing just now. Can I get in on this too? And supplicate is to bind yourself away from things. So he's saying, come on, I really need God. Psalm 103, it says in verse number 7, God made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the sons of Israel. Psalm 103:7, God made known his ways to Moses, his acts or deeds to the children of Israel. That is a direct contrast. It's a direct distinction between all that Israel knew was what he did. Moses saying, I don't want to just know what you did. I just saw what you did. I want to see you. I want to know your way. I want to know your life. I want to know your derech eretz. I want to know the way of life that you live, because I want to walk in that life. I don't want to just see and be factual about all the information that just happened. I want to know God. In fact, that's what he says here, isn't it? In verse 13. That I may, let me know your ways, so that I may know you.
I think that never happened until Jesus came on the scene.
I had a young man at a Christian school yesterday where I was the invited lecturer who was raised Muslim and has come to believe in Jesus. He's at this Christian school, year 11. And he said that same question to me. Wait a minute, why are you still Jewish? Because he's not still Muslim. So he's projecting, saying, if I'm not supposed to still be Muslim, you better not still be Jewish if we're all going to be Christian in this thing. I thought, this is really a great question. I so appreciated him and these students whose hands would still be up, still be asking questions, maybe to avoid their next examination. But still, they were very keen. I really liked them out in Jural. And he wanted to know why I kept all those Torah laws since Jesus came, meaning old, bad, new, good. And like you say, I thought that's all didn't start until Jesus started, but of course that's facetious. People have known God. Noah found favor. All the different people who represented God. King David was a man after God's own heart. Ethnic peoples, whether Chinese, Korean, Salvadorian, Aborigines, have a whole lot more to do with Jewish believers than white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, because they see ministry as everybody should be like us, which is a flavor. Vanilla is a flavor. But ethnics, Japanese and Thai, and people of any, not just nation, but of races, will say, well, we need our own group. We need our own songs.
Yeah.
I told you about the Nepalese people a couple weeks ago, who were some of the most beautiful people on the planet, who sang and danced, loving Jesus people. And they were all living around the Strathfield area. Just phenomenal people who had this Nepalese fellowship. That was so cool. I didn't have to explain to them, well, we need a ministry among Jewish people. Because they said, well, of course. We need a ministry among Nepalese. You need Jew. This is it. But it's those who've been in country for a little longer who don't understand the need for ethnic ministry. Pardon me while I got off a little track there. Don't miss, verse 13 is probably the most important of tonight, so that you get that in you. If I found favor, then let me know your ways, so that I may know you. But don't finish there. So that I may find favor in your sight. So it is, God, grace me that I might know your ways. Grace me that I might know you. Grace me that I might be living in grace. So in other words, even when you begin in grace, finish in grace. The danger for Jews and for really any religionist in coming to faith in Yeshua is we say, tell you what, we've done pretty well now. We'll take over from here, God. No, you won't. No, really, I did all the mandatory items. I got baptized. I read my Bible. I go to that community of faith. We meet together weekly here at Bible class. I got it. I got it. No, you don't. We so desperately need Him that cry, that I may find favor in your sight, is still the plead in which we've got to be. So I like that it's double nod. And relationship is not one way, it really is two way, but it is initiated and maintained by the Almighty. He is the sponsor, we respond, and then He yet follows through again. Boy, get that down, you get it down. Verse 14, He said, my presence will go with you. I'll give you rest. He said, if your presence doesn't go with us, don't take us out of here. Can you talk to God like this? Do you feel that liberty to speak to the Almighty like this? He spoke to Him like one speaks to a friend. They had a relationship. Don't miss that. That is exactly what God wants for you and for all of us. Verse 17 to 23. What is God doing here? He is saying, Moish, you get my presence. The people have been reluctant to be with me. They chose a calf. They can have their calf. I'm going to send my messenger ahead. No, they're your people. All right, tell you what, I'll be with you. I'll be with you. No, I want to see your glory. He says, no, you can't even see that. You can see the back. That trail, or achor, the afterwards, the leftover, the back. You can see that. Et panai, my face. So He speaks to him face to face, but He doesn't show him His face. Maybe it was the original email. Maybe it was the original telephone. Maybe whatever it was an axiom. It's an idiom that we use. Face to face doesn't mean he saw His face, he saw His face. It means directly. Nobody ever saw God's face. Who else said that? New Testament. We had a guy who came in today who is a new believer, and he is a oneness person. Do you know what oneness is? It just means Jesus is the Father, Jesus is the Son, and Jesus is the Holy Spirit. It's wrong. It's not true. But it's a standard fringe element of Pentecostalism, mostly out of the U.S. It's modalism. That's all it is. It's an old heresy. It's not a new thing. So I said to the guy, who did Yeshua pray to? Well, he was praying to himself. Well, no. From whom did the Father turn away? If Yeshua took the sin of the world. There has to be a separation, or else you're still carrying your sin. Anyway, oneness is one of those weird theologies, and it comes from a scientific reading of Scripture that says, this is that, therefore that is this, therefore, Jesus wore yellow, or something, whatever you get to. It's a syllogism that's not biblically required. The Bible is not a logic book, but it's not illogical. The Bible is not a logic book, but it's not illogical. So he's going to hide Moses in the cleft of the rock. That song in verse 22. It's a pretty song.
From Paul Wilbur.
Yeah, and there were people who wrote songs about that before then. So what is God's response to Moses' cry for show me your glory? He says, my presence will go with you. Moses says, great, but don't forget all the people. So God says, verse 17, all right, I'll do this thing which you've spoken, because you've found favor in my sight, and I've known you by name. Moses said, great, show me your glory. He says, we're going to work out something here, but you're not going to see my face. There are limitations in our prayers. We saw Moses interceding for the Jewish people. We saw Moses supplicating. And now we see Moses limited in prayer by the glory of God. There's something about God that says, you can't get it all. You're not going to understand it all. If God were small enough, what do we say? If he were small enough for our pea brain, he wouldn't be big enough for our hearts. Don't think scientifically now. You put God in a box, well then you can go to Jesus. You can say that. They tried to put Jesus in a box and he busted out of the tomb. But that's the problem. We get these scientific-oriented people who try to figure out God. If God's really good and Satan's really bad, then why does he allow Satan? Why did he allow suffering? And it's all this logic stuff where we insist that syllogisms of human logic ought to apply to biblical stuff. It doesn't work that way.
Reason only takes you so far. You have to engage faith.
God gets to be God. And that's not fair, or that's not reasonable, or that's not true, or that's not loving, or that I wouldn't do that if I were God. Well, actually, if you were God, yes, that's what you do, because that's what God did. You mean if God were you? I'm glad that's not caprice. I wouldn't want that at all. So this idea of God showing his glory or not is demonstrating his prevention of some things. You can't get God to give you everything you want. You can't get God to show you everything you want to see. It's just not going to happen. That doesn't mean we shouldn't ask. Fine. But listen for his answer that says no. There will be a day. That is awesome when we ponder it. Next week we're going to look at the verse of the glory of Moses. And he had to cover himself in the Corinthian letter. We're going to look at that. And what the law did, and it shone so brightly that even Moses had to cover his face or else the people would have been burned. So that'll be chapter 34. We'll look at that. And if that be so, what about the brightness of Yeshua? And how massive and awesome is he? Yes. And when that happens, oh my goodness, I don't want to... So we're going to go through the same kind of emotional roller coaster of relationship with the glory of God. We'll probably talk a lot more about glory next week. A funny word. We don't think in terms of glory. Oh, honey, you look so glorious tonight. We don't say that. That's a glorious outfit. The cricketers use that. The cricket announcers use that word. What a glorious six, they call it. That was a glorious shot, I think. Wow, majestic. It flew high over the fence. I get that. But most of the time we don't use it of other people. We're going to unpack that a little bit more. So the Hebrew is kavod, and kavod means a couple things: beauty, glory, and it also describes weight. We'll talk about kavod next week.
Jesus said in the Beatitudes, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
Good.
Does he mean in the natural life, Or does it mean in the afterlife or after Jesus comes back again?
Great question. Seeing God in human circumstances, seeing God's hand, seeing God's hand hiding me in the cleft of the rock, seeing God's purposes. It's almost Psalm 103 verse 7 again. I want to see His ways, not just what He did. So it's more than His activity. Oh, there is a God. I saw the beach. And I saw the waves. It was pretty cool. But I saw what God did in saving that guy. I heard a beautiful story today on 103.2 FM about a guy who saved his daughter in a canoe. And I'll probably use that in a story at the Hanukkah meeting in a couple weeks. A beautiful story of a man who gave his life so that his daughter, both sinking in a bad river, and he pushed the canoe over to help to some other friends who were in another canoe, and he saved his daughter, and then he didn't live himself. But to see God's purposes or to see God's plan or God's ways, those are all part of it, I think, in seeing God. And not only in this life, but your question is right, in the world to come as well. Yeah, only the pure in heart will see God, but I'm not pure in heart. Well, then God better purify your heart so that you can get to heaven and see Him. So there's some things that are present tense, some that are future tense, included in those Beatitudes.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia 2001. God bless you.